Hello my dear viewers, welcome to a new episode. That's supposedly an Egyptian citizen who went to Russia and tried to convince them he's a rich tourist. On the 25th of February 1956, and during a secret meeting of the Communist Soviet Party, a meeting titled, "It was when the new Soviet Union leader Nikita Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union had committed many mistakes under Stalin's ruling, and to save the country, they should denounce Stalin's era, and he called this movement De-Stalinization. Let me tell you my friend, that the world turned upside down after the announcement. Stalin wasn't just a plain person. He was spicy, abo mead? He was the ruler under which Soviet Union became a greater power, a superpower that defeated Hitler, and divided Berlin, Germany, Europe, and the whole world into two parts, an Eastern communist and a Western capitalist. Once the announcement reached Western Europe and the US, they kept broadcasting it. The West was gloating over communism that condemned Stalin, its own leader. Countries like Poland and Hungary witnessed processions against communism. West is gloating. Many communist governments condemned what Khrushchev did. The West is gloating. Among all this chaos and gloating, stood a man from afar looking and saw that this could be a chance. It does look like a jackpot. A golden chance to be the world leader of communism. That man was the Chinese communist leader, Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao. In the 30s of the 20th century, China went through two wars, a civil war between Nationalist Party, Kuomintang, and Communist Party of China, and both parties of the Civil War were in a war against Japan. The Kuomintang was trying to fight the Japanese army to army, a regular war, but was unfortunately heavily defeated. On the other hand, the Chinese Communist Party led by Mao, was able to defeat the Japanese many times. Why? Abo mead. Because communists depended on the guerrilla wars. I call it the hit and run wars. Tip and run without tactics or order. This tip and run in the irregular army achieved great defeats over the Japanese, great losses as well. This guerrilla war was the way Mao and communists managed to win the civil war between them and the Chinese nationalists. The nationalists tried to siege Jiangxi, the communists fought in the south, and in those 4 times, the communists managed to break the siege by guerrilla wars. We can't get a hold of them. But in the 5th time, something different happens. In October 1934, Mao led communists to escape the siege. They escaped to the north, which was known later as the Long March. It's very important in China's history. It feels like all the important titles in China's history are literary. Let the Flowers Bloom, Long March, Cultural Revolution. I don't need to tell you that this long march was really long, 6,000 miles. Communists passed through 24 rivers and 18 mountains. A march that started with 86,000 communists and ended with 4,000. Whoa. This huge loss resulted from continuous attacks from nationalists and Japanese, attacks all through the march. At the end, Mao managed to reach Shaanxi in the north with the communists. Historians considered this march as the longest continuous march in war's history, although other people didn't think this was accurate. For example, Yung Chong, the author of Mao, The Unknown Story, said that Mao exaggerated a bit. That's her words. Chinese communists, not my words. I hope anyone who sees this episode knows that I just report. Actually, Chinese Communist Party, she didn't say he exaggerated a bit, she said he exaggerated a lot. She said he added battles that didn't even happen, and that the party's leaders and him were carried on shoulders in the march, while the soldiers were walking on foot. She also said that the Chinese nationalists caused limited attacks, it was losing from the Japanese on a side and from the guerrilla wars on the other. The Chinese nationalist parties saw this to their own benefit. It's as if the communists were being exiled to the north. Go, go. According to Yung Chong, you Chinese communists, Mao turned a tactic withdrawal into a miracle march. Her words. The Long March changed the way the people looked at communists, after they saw them kids that hit and run, an irregular force between two regular forces, nationalists and Japanese army. Things would change, and the Chinese people saw communists as legends. Thousands of Chinese joined them, and the Communist Party's number increased from 50,000 to 500,000. Mao, who led this long march, was made into the heart of the legend. Same as thousands walked with him in an impossible journey and he saved them. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese said they'd follow Mao forever. Just like how Sunflower followed the Sun. World War II ended in 1945, Japan lost and withdrew from China. At the same time, Mao won his war with the Nationalist Party, who were called Kuomintang. They withdrew with their leader Chiang Kai-shek, to an island called Formosa, where they founded a republic and considered it the real nationalist China. which later became Taiwan, my friend. I got it. Abo Mead, that's why China thinks Taiwan is a part of it. While Taiwan believes it's an independent island and China is the one part of it. Taiwan is no longer interested now to get China back, but China is the one interested. See, my friend, what it is all about? And what did Nancy Pelosi's visit do and to whom it gave legality? It's a long story, my friend, but you get the idea. That's the core of all problems, this civil war and their escape to that island. That's why you should keep a close eye on this island, because if there would be a third world war, it'd be because of it. Anyway, back to our story. In 1949, China was ruled by communism under Mao Zedong. Since the beginning, Mao considered Stalin as his role model, and same to how Stalin led a 5-year plan in the 20s, that turned the Soviet Union from agriculture country to industrial giant. Mao would also build a 5-year plan to increase China's productivity by 128%, 595 infrastructure projects to drive China to produce 5 million tons of steel. That's beside an agrarian reform plan that would help 300 million farmers and increase production by 30%. To the point where Mao advised the Chinese to eat 5 meals a day. We'll be having a lot of extra food, so eat. To not leave leftovers for the devil. China's extra food got it scared of Judgment Day if it's not over. You already sense the plot twist coming. The Chinese people called Mao, God of Harvest. Up until here, things are nice and lovely, with great economical promises, dreams, and projects. 595 projects and turn the infrastructure upside down. You get life, my friend, but not how episodes are made. Episodes, my friend, can't depend on happy news only. There has to be issues to get views. Mao's agrarian reform erased the landlord's class and over 1 million of them were executed. You might think 1 million is enough, but this is China, and Mao was afraid that instead of them a class of land-owning farmers would appear and that this class can be a threat to his ruling. Mao's solution that he quoted from Stalin was what was known as collectives. Farmers grouped their lands together in cooperatives. Each cooperative had more than 150 families planting and harvesting under the supervision of the Communist Party. Everything was going according to Mao's plan, and according to his role model Stalin's ideology. Until Khrushchev came out with his De-Stalinization, which had a warning that these Stalinized agrarian cooperatives harmed production more than it benefited it. Because farmers felt like the land wasn't theirs but the party's. The party on its side wasn't successfully managing it. All these dreams are threatened when Khrushchev introduced De-Stalinization. He said, "This Stalin that you all admire had us thrown under the bus, his politics has to be changed. We're Soviets and we know better." Mao felt like what Stalin did probably wasn't enough. And that when he died, someone could erase him and his history. Mao couldn't accept this. This moment changed Mao's ruling system of China forever. He decided that he needed to prepare for being a superpower, and snatch the world communism sovereignty from the Soviet Union. What Khrushchev did, couldn't just pass by. Most importantly, he wanted to instill his ruling against any opposition, inside or outside the party. Just to avoid having someone come out later erasing his achievements and history just like Khrushchev. Of course, my friend, I don't need to tell you that for Mao to do everything on his own it wasn't him. Because simply he didn't know who was on his side and who wasn't. That's why in May 1956, the Chinese party led by Mao the 100 Flowers campaign. And let the flowers bloom, man, don't be gloomy. He let everyone publicly criticize the Communist Party. Go on, talk, people. What problems do you have with communists? Criticize it without boundaries or fear, and publicly. Let 100 flowers bloom. I don't need to tell you from my obvious tone that this was just a setup. Once flowers bloomed and intellectuals criticized the Communist Party and some members of the party itself criticized the party's politics, Mao came after and harvested all these flowers with a frightening purge campaign. Why did you tell us to do it then? More than 1 million opposed were sent to re-education camps where they were cleansed from the anti-communism ideas and teaching them communism from scratch. Whoever installed the communism did it wrong. We'll uninstall it and work on it. We'll reinstall communism better. Imagine being in a gym and the captain says, "You're doing communism wrong." They were extracting the critical thoughts. Just like chicken when it's put in hot water to extract feathers from it. This campaign got Mao to find the opposition and exterminate it, and to instill fear in anyone who could oppose him again. That was the first step. Remember, my friend, Mao's goal was to lead the world communism. At that time, in November 1957, Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union, in 15 years' time, would overpower the US economically. Here Mao said, I'll take the lead now. He put a similar bet that China would surpass UK's steel production in 15 years. Mao put a new 5-year plan, which is the Great Leap Forward that we heard a lot about. Mao wanted to repeat his first 5-year plan's success, but imagine when your boss tells you, "We want you with us, but we'll increase the target 10 times, all with the same salary and in the same amount of time." The goals that Mao set that time weren't realistic at all, and bigger than what the Chinese economy can handle. At that time, Mao turned all of China with its huge population into an army that produces 2 goods only, wheat and steel. The Chinese farmer was surprised by the communists grouping farmers in communes, which were camps ruled by partisan cadres who operated them from sunrise to sunset. It also created incentives programs for them to get the employees all excited and working for these incentives. A program built on points. The more you work, the more points you get. And when one wins, abo mead, does he go to the Maldives or Hawaii or where? I don't want to kill your dreams, my friend, but he got 250 grams of food in a day. Isn't that too little, abo mead? Yes, there was less. Because if you didn't work, you didn't eat. What? Who doesn't work, doesn't eat? Even if I had a creative block, abo mead? My dear friend, let me tell you that pregnant women, the pregnant ones who produced kids to become workers later on, when they didn't work, food supplies were cut off for them to the point of dying from hunger. Again, my friend, working from sunrise to sunset in such exhausting work had its reward as 250 grams of food. My dear, 250 grams is like 4 cucumbers, 2 or 3 apples at most for the whole day. A hard-working day in the lands of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. This is like my episode payment. I take 250 grams of cucumber and apples in one episode. 2 cucumbers and apple. See? This is the generous payment of the episode. Does the problem stop here? Do we end this great leap and call it a day? No, my friend. The Chinese farmer, whose experience go thousands of years back and knew very well that not all lands could be used for wheat, saw that the cadres, people who managed farming while not knowing anything about it. They forced everyone on planting wheat and forced wrong irrigation methods, and caused the lands to be fallow. Sorry, abo mead, why didn't these 1,000-year experienced farmers tell them? Wait, my friend. What, is Nicki Minaj coming, abo mead? No, not her. The one coming is the party official. The partisan cadres weren't judges of China Got Talent, while just registering points for things they did. According to the historian Yang Jisheng, the party official had, if someone opposed or harassed this official, he wouldn't deduct him. It actually happened to thousands of farmers. Why didn't someone call Mao about this and tell him to check things out? We won't finish the 15-year target and won't take the leap. The thing is, Mao at the time was starting a new campaign, known as the 4 Pests campaign. I like the one choosing the names, abo mead, it's like we're in a PR company, not a communist party. That was the 4 Pests campaign, like the 4 Horsemen, or something. Again, my friend, the Long March, the Great Leap Forward, Let 100 Flowers Bloom, and 4 Pests, it's like you're in the book fair, not China. One would tell me to get into it. Who are the 4 pests? Listen carefully now: rats, birds, mosquitoes, and flies. What? Was Mao a cat? Now he's meow, not Mao. The leader of the Communist Party had issues with a bird, 2 insects, and a mammal. He was over with humans, and these were the ones left, probably. He needs a pesticide company. He also reminded me of the old Cabnori ad: no water, no fire, no insect, no rat. Anyway, Mao said that the agricultural production wasn't up to the rates it was supposed to because of these 4 pests. Let me tell you, that millions of Chinese would hunt them down, and who didn't hunt, banged drums under the trees for birds to fall down dead from the noise. There was like a DJ there. All of China, the world's largest population, was hunting birds on a beat. Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Oh, birds flying high. Flyin'. That's it, I'm done with today's target. The professor Hu Xingdu said that this campaign created an ecological disaster. Because as much as these 4 pests caused some problems, but they kept some other creatures under control. These 4 pests controlled other creatures. If set free, or if these 4 pests were removed, they would increase and cause other issues. Locusts and other insects crazily increased and ate crops. There were no rats or birds to eat these locusts, so locusts spread and ate crops. What made this environmental issue worse was it happened with China's deforestation to get wood for fuel and warmth. Some sources say that almost all of China's trees were cut off. That's all, abo mead, right? Do the disasters stop here? No, not yet, there are some more. Remember the promise that was made? That after 15 years, China would surpass UK in steel industry. The Communist Party enlisted 100 million farmers to the army. What? Minus 100 million farmers. They took them from the lands they worked in. Come you farmer who doesn't have any industrial experience and go work in the steel factory. Listen to the new 5-year plan. Remember the target was 5 million tons, now it's 100 million tons. Come on, farmer, faster. We're running out of time. The target was massive and giant. There was a competition between all agrarian communes on who would produce more in steel. That was a turning point, my friend, you'll see where it led. The target was impossible, so the solutions were desperate. You didn't just raise the target from 5 to 100 million tons, you also brought farmers with no experience to get the job done, and had a competition on who produces more. One of the known desperate solutions was what's called backyard furnaces, primitive furnaces that farmers built in lands and houses where they melted any metal for manufacturing steel. The partisan cadres was frightened of not achieving the target, to the point where some solutions were we can't find metal to melt. If we didn't melt metal, we're doomed. Get me these plows and agrarian tools to burn. What? This actually happened, my friend. They couldn't achieve the steel target, so they took the farming tools to melt them to try and achieve anything at all. Not just that. To top off the failure, if the target wouldn't be achieved there, let's achieve it in failure. All the steel produced by the primitive furnaces was of poor quality, because it was mixed with cheap material. The target mattered more. So the steel produced wasn't good enough to be used. So all this suffering was meaningless. The most important thing for the party official was that on papers his commune produced more than the neighbor commune. You might suppose that problems stop here. Not yet, no. The thing is, your agriculture produce that was low and not enough for the people, was being shipped to the Soviet Union to pay off China's debts for the Soviet Union. Millions of farmers on the verge of famine tried to escape from country to cities, but they found the Communist Party sieging the countryside and forcing them to go back to dying of hunger in the lands, because it was more important that production continued. There were debts to pay and leaps to jump. The result was one of the largest famines in recorded history, my friend. A famine that mercilessly hit China. What's odd is that the world at its time didn't know anything about the famine. The one we know now is that Chinese famine was happening while the world didn't know. The historian Yang Jishun said that Mao was preparing Anhui County to be the acting stage for the foreign press. We don't have famine, we're doing okay. Look at our staged city. A fake studio with farmers of good life and sky-high production rates. To the point where the French president, François Mitterrand, when he came back from a China visit in 1961, he described Chairman Mao as a humanitarian. He isn't a dictator. What I saw in Sinkehi, he couldn't say it. What I saw in Anhui says that this man is great, chapeau to him. There's no famine here, people, the French president was from Boulogne-le-Caire or something. The only smart one who understood what all this was about. Who, my friend? Biden. What got Biden here, my friend? Not yet. Anyway, to stay in lane, the only one who knew what was really going on was Khrushchev. He knew very well that this man was hiding disasters. I witnessed Stalin. I'm not a Noodles guy. Khrushchev sent to Mao to warn him in 1959, listen man, I'm telling you from the future, it'll end up like Stalin, that's great. In all seriousness, Mao didn't listen to Khrushchev, and announces in 1961 that the then Soviets were revisionist traitors and corrupts of Karl Marx's ideas. One might say, abo mead, maybe Khrushchev was jealous of Stalin. The man died in peace in his bed and left the countries as a superpower head-to-head with the US. What's wrong with Stalin and Mao's ways? Firstly, fix your tone. Secondly, let me tell you about the ending that Khrushchev was warning from. Because you don't get it, just like Mao. Really, abo mead? Let me, my dear viewer, take you back a few years. I'll do what they call in drama, a flashback. We'll go back to 1928. Stalin wanted to turn the Soviet Union from agrarian to industrial power. So we made a plan to produce a lot of wheat, then export it to Europe, get a lot of money and spend it on the industry. The most important part of his plan was Ukraine, famous for fertile lands. Historians called it the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. That's why when Russia invaded Ukraine there was a crisis with wheat prices in the world. For its fertile lands. Stalin got rid of all the A-class in Ukraine, intellectuals, teachers, and clergies who opposed the Soviets' use of Ukraine's crops. At that time, Ukraine was under the Soviet Union. By the time we arrived to 1931, Stalin put an impossible target for wheat production in Ukraine. It's like when you have an exam tomorrow and you make a 5x plan for the chapters you'd finish in the 15 minutes left. So you'd find the 1,000-page book needing 8 hours to study. Stalin ordered Ukraine to deliver 4 million tons of wheat, and when the Ukrainian farmers tried to escape the countryside, the Soviet who forcibly took their lands sieged them and took them back to the lands. Like you say, Mao copied and pasted Stalin's plan. He didn't even rephrase it, he took it as it is. This caused a great famine famous in Ukraine and the world known as Holodomor. That was one of the greatest famines of the world, it killed 4 million people. There were scary stories of people eating their children. That was the famine Khrushchev was warning from. He warned Mao that following these methods would lead to these results. I saw the future of it, and I know. But all the sources say that Mao had no problem killing more. In a document from the 25th of March 1959, Mao assured he was ready to sacrifice the countryside for his plan, even if it led to the death of half of the Chinese. At that time, China's population was 660 million people, so this man had no problem in the death of 330 million people. But thank God, what? Abo Meade, the Chinese famine didn't happen. And Khrushchev was overreacting and jealous of Mao? No, my friend, it did. 55 million people died. Thank God, Abo Meade. They weren't 300 million. That target was good, Abo Meade. What? Am I talking to a serial killer or a psychopath? 55 million people. That was the largest famine that killed people in history. 55 million. That doesn't just equate to countries but to continents. Let me tell you that the number of deaths in this Chinese famine was double the deaths of the First World War, the one they call the Great War. The Second World War with all its countries had almost the same deaths in a Chinese famine. Again, we didn't know about it at the time, we found out afterwards. According to some statistics, the number of deaths was almost the same number of deaths by the Spanish flu. Again, it happened while no one knew. Actually, Mao didn't run from the consequences of that great famine, his powers started falling back. In April 1959, someone else took leadership of China. Abo Meade. This means that Mao died and they were looking for another leader. No, my friend, Mao was still alive, but they made him lead the party only. Again, that was Chairman Mao, the president of the country and leader of the party. But now he was just the party leader, and the country had another leader, Shaoqi, who investigated the famine, and when he went to his hometown, Hunan, he found many of his relatives and friends had died of hunger. This would made him condemn Mao's leap. The Great Leap Forward sent them backwards. In 1962, Shaoqi stopped this leap. Shaoqi gathered more than 7,000 of the partisan cadres who provided the parties with false statistics on production, known as in that moment. Mao faced a fate worse than he feared, but a conference was held where his politics were condemned and he witnessed it. Shaoqi confessed to Mao in a meeting between them that they were both responsible for the famine. He said he would make sure that after their deaths, history wrote what happened. You might think that this was it, my friend. Abo Meade would finish up by saying watch the episodes and the sources, because Mao's story was over, a failed great leap forward, and the largest famine in history killing 55 million people. The leadership of world communism failed and his leadership of China slipped. Was Mao now politically done? Actually no. Mao found a last card from his godfather Stalin, that after 3 years of Ukraine famine and threatening Stalin's power, people were angry, 4 million people died and he was responsible. Despite all that, Stalin managed to restore his power by executing 1 million cadres. It was later known as the Great Terror. They were 1 million. The problem was, contrary to Stalin, Mao at that time didn't have the power to control the party. He knew if he didn't restore his power, his condemn wouldn't stop at a conference, it would be throughout history. To stop this condemning, he had to control China's to be written history, control the history that researchers, historians, and intellectuals would write. How? Abo Meade. I'll tell you. Mao decided to destroy the party from the inside, a devil plan to control the party. We know it as the Cultural Revolution. Mao didn't think about running, quitting, or apologizing. He knew that all what happened would lead to a revolution pointing at him, so he decided to precede it, and become the revolution itself. In May 1966, the Communist Party announced what's known as Mao warned, saying, "People, I know where the problem is. The problem is that our party." What is it? Mao is raided by the bourgeois. What? It's raided by the bourgeois. Really? And I was wondering why did people die? It turned out the party was raided by bourgeois. Sorry Abo Mead, I'm not knowledgeable on Marxian work. What does bourgeois mean? The bourgeois are the class above the workers and under landlords. That was the class most attacked by communism, because they took advantage of the class below and faked to be the class above, so they made the current situation stone still. In China, the moment the party pointed at someone saying, bourgeois, he'd be destroyed. Bourgeoisie was like a crime in any communist place. If a food blogger didn't like the restaurant, he said, bourgeois. Mao used this crime and pinned it on all party members who condemned him. Not just them, he pinned it on any intellectual who could even think about it, like researchers, college professors, and teachers. Who else would write history against Mao? It's them, so they would be pinned too. That was the Cultural Revolution. It was a revolution led by Mao with a fake goal of cleansing the communist society, but in reality, according to historical readings and explanations, was a political campaign for Mao to precede the revolution, condemning him. As we might say, it's better to be safe than sorry. History is written by the victor. He also used the rebels to fulfill his personal goals to get rid of some party members and other intellectuals in China that could condemn him. Mao directed his revolution to a specific age range, the young students from 13 to 23 years old. More than 500,000 college students and 6 million high school students would obey the leader whom they grew up knowing he was a legend who led the Long March and freed the country from Japanese. They obeyed him. He said they were the pure generation to save China from the four olds. The wife of the US ambassador during the Cultural Revolution said that the youth enthusiasm was prevailing. It was very radical and primary, and according to her, it was as if China went back to scary ages of no civilization, and these millions of students established what's known as the Red Guards, a movement that protected Mao. They simply no longer trusted the leading party nor the intellectual elite in China. Millions of Red Guard students only read one thing, a book that collected Mao's sayings. They saw it as a holy book, the Red Book, and in return they burned all other books. That was Mao's Cultural Revolution. According to some sources, this book would be considered as the most printed book on earth. It was printed over 1 billion copies, to the point where the Soviet Union banned it despite being a communist book. The fear was from Mao's insane popularity. One of the book's sayings, and the most famous one, a revolution is not a dinner party, or writing an essay, or painting a picture. It's an act of violence by which one class overthrows another. In his book, Mao condemns all the peaceful attempts of revolution and charges a teenage generation for a violent mission. Students attacked teachers and college professors in schools and universities. In August 1966, Peking University alone had more than 200 professors suicide. A third of the teaching staff in Hunan Psychiatry University also committed suicide. Why? Abo Mead. Because students tortured them, put cones on their heads and called them traitors. Students rebelled against old buildings, like temples, worship houses, and museums. The dominant belief was that all history before Mao was useless. That's why I told you, he ended history before history ended him. That's literally, not metaphorically. Temples, museums, teachers, and researchers. Not just that. Any foreign thing in the country was useless. A book, painting, image, or a cow. I'm serious, my friend. Some sources say that members of the Red Guard slaughtered cows of an entire farm. Why? Abo Mead. I'll tell you, because the cows were Dutch. No, sorry, we can't. It's Dutch cows, anti-revolution, it's foreign. Sorry, no can do. According to the historian Frank Dikotter, during this Cultural Revolution, Mao waited for the right moment, and when it came, he demanded the Red Guards to direct their anger to the party in Liu Shaoqi. Who was this? Abo Mead, the country's president, claiming that the president and party wanted to silence them. Mao managed to direct this anger towards the enemies he wanted to get rid of, his enemies inside and outside the party. Mao, with the Cultural Revolution, restored his place, his cult personality, that Khrushchev warned from. In 1968, for example, Pakistan's Prime Minister visited Mao and gave him a basket of 40 mangoes. What Prime Minister visits a president with a bunch of mangoes? My friend, please wait. At that time, the Chinese had never seen mango before. What? At that time, that wasn't even the weirdest thing, because since the Chinese worshipped Mao this much, they considered this mango a holy gift and no one ate it. When the mango went bad, they wax mummified it as a holy symbol. Oh geez. They made posters and demonstrations for it. Mango? It's good and all. Abo Mead, but not to that extent. Not just that. Let me tell you that a source says that there was a rude person. The Chinese didn't say it, I did. This person made fun of mango and said that it's overrated. Not just that, he said that sweet potato is better. The Chinese heard that and said, "What do you mean mango is overrated?" Do you know what they did? Executed him. What? They were right, but not to execution. In 1968, when Mao sensed that things started to get out of control and that the Red Guard accomplished its mission and erased his enemies, Mao started a new campaign. In this campaign, 20 million young people were sent to the countryside, considering the countryside as pure, to prepare a generation of leaders pure from the impure elite. You can say that at that moment Mao gave leaders and youth something else to do, since they already accomplished the mission. But that wasn't the end of the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution ended in 1976 when Mao died. Although the victims of the Cultural Revolution was around 1 million, it was a small number compared to the deaths of the famine, 55 million. But the psychological effect of the revolution mania was way more horrible. Mao killed the innocence of an entire young generation. Millions of them were involved with killing their teachers, some even killed their families, seeing them as enemies of the country and Mao. Temples and libraries were destroyed, and all the places that saved China's memory was destroyed. An entire generation spent the rest of their youth, after all this mania, exiled in the countryside and mountains by orders from Mao himself. A generation that historians called lost generation. Many analysis differentiated between Mao and Stalin. Stalin acted upon his power through his soldiers and party members. That's why one of his men, Khrushchev, turned against and condemned him after he died. While Mao's intelligence was seen in how the violence and massacres of the revolution was people versus people, sons versus parents. In his book, Mao's Last Revolution, the author says that the current rule of the Communist Party is that just talking about Mao's history would cause damage to the party. To reopen this man's history, it would destroy the party's history. The CCP realized that opening Mao's records after his death and prosecuting him for the Leap, Famine, or Cultural Revolution, would deny the party the legitimacy of its ruling. It would destroy the society where each of its individuals was an accomplice. This way, Mao's last wish came true, to die as a great ruler, and avoid Stalin's fate after death. Till now, the Chinese government doesn't tolerate any mentions of Mao's crimes. To the point where in the 60s, a decree was announced forbidding writing the CCP's history. In 1999, when the researcher Yang Yisong tried to collect the Cultural Revolution testimonies, he was arrested. Here, we ask the last question: did all this writing forbidding rules make people in China forget what happened? Or they didn't. In February 2020, with the beginning of COVID in China, the President Xi Jinping announced a People's War policy, where policemen were responsible for the implementation of social distancing, but not just them. Who else? The citizens. The citizens were also responsible to report one another if one didn't abide to the precautions. Once this policy started, some young men exaggerated in implementing, and they asked people about their clothes and routes. They wore red badges. There's a video of an employee tying a villager to a column because he didn't wear a mask. If you looked close. The only places where these young men didn't show up and it was allowed to break the social distancing rules were the temples and memorials of Mao Zedong, where no one dared to ask people to leave from there. All these events reminded the Chinese of the Cultural Revolution, to the point where demonstrations started with a slogan of the writer Tanya Branigan said that the Cultural Revolution in China's history is an open wound that can bleed anytime because it was never treated. She called the Cultural Revolution transgenerational trauma. She gave an example of a Chinese student in therapy, because he suffered from imaginations of him killing his teacher. By therapy, they knew that this student who didn't witness the Cultural Revolution, his father saw his grandfather die on hands of the Red Guards. And this trauma somehow found its way from the father to the son. That's why COVID and its precautions reminded people with the Cultural Revolution trauma. The thing is, during the COVID time, there wasn't a specific class assigned to execute law, order, and punishment. This authority was assigned to any and all of the people. Same as what happened in the Cultural Revolution when the ordinary students were the ones practicing and doing what they thought was right, they implemented it on the people, and punished the ones breaking it. Tanya Branigan also says that the Cultural Revolution's lost generation that was sent to the countryside and mountains, is now the old generation that's ruling China, and most famous one is Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, if you don't know, is China's current president. His family was one of Mao's purge victims, and he was personally sent as one of the 20 million sent to the countryside as purging generation. His sister took her own life as a result of these events. According to a report of the famous magazine, The Economist, it seemed like Xi Jinping learned from his past that China is a superpower, but, and listen carefully, is sailing on a sea of chaos. That's why Xi Jinping, according to this report, is trying to be a strong leader of a stable economy, and to be a symbol of this power and this stability. For this to happen, there has to be an airtight surveillance that makes China alone as a country among 192 countries. Has more than half of surveillance cameras in the world in a social media network fully surveillanced by the government. And just like the old times, when the partisan cadres gave citizens points, in 2014, something called social credit system appeared. If you were one of the old El Dahi followers, you'll remember an episode called The God of the Atheist Country. This episode discussed that by 2020 there would be a social credit system, a system that evaluates citizens with a points account that varies according to their communal services, and their surveillance behavior everywhere. The journalist David Rennie says that Xi Jinping's ambition is scary because he rules the same way Mao did, but this time he doesn't rule by partisan cadres that falsely record info on paper, but by the AI. China publishes most of the research on AI, it owns most of the invention patents in AI field. It also has a surveillance ability higher than the one Mao had in the 60s. David Rennie also says that the whole world is scared of a war that Xi Jinping can start on the island where the Chinese nationalists reside, the Kuomintang whom Mao left. But a war that Xi Jinping can start on Taiwan today, can make Xi Jinping a figure bigger than Mao in the eyes of the Chinese. That's David Rennie. This could be a confirmation on Tanya Branigan saying that China is still wrapped up in its history of wars, famines, revolutions, and intense fear of chaos. Nations are just like humans, they go through traumas, and the only way to overcome these traumas could be by facing them and turning them from traumas into a memory to learn from. Maybe after this, we can overcome this trauma. According to psychology, the trauma that we fear overcoming and always try to avoid it, we give it power to control our future, and no matter how hard we hide it, it can resurface and force us to relive it. The same way document foul play happened during Mao's days, happened again during COVID and increased its spread in the beginning and held back fighting it. After this epic story, my friend, remember that whoever forgets his past, can never fix his mistakes. Also remember that the real cultural revolution didn't start in China under Mao, but it started here. Where? ABO Mead. Here in this room. We didn't study this one. ABO Mead. I'm telling you now, the history I'm writing here, I'll control it, the cultural revolution starts here. I'll gather all the young people around me to end the old history and write a new history where I'm the hero. I'm the founder of the modern cultural revolution here in this room. I'm excited. ABO Mead. What do we do in this revolution? You'll see all the new and old episodes, look at sources, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. One last thing I want to say, my friend, in my personal useless opinion, or is actually useful, and we know why, that the man we need to keep a mind on, isn't Mao but the person whose picture is seen more than once. Other than me, because there are two of mine here as the Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping, the founder of modern China, the founder of the new Chinese economical view making China who it is now. That's Deng Xiaoping. He's the man you see here in the background. He's always here, because many people think he's the Korean leader. That's it. I got to go now because I have a date with a mango.